morning. Good morning, Judge Ahlers. When you are ready, you may begin with your opening statement.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Ahlers. I am a District Associate Judge from District 2B. I live in Fort Dodge. Due to the fact that this is the third time that I've appeared before this commission this year, it has dawned on me that this is not a case of love at first sight. But I'm hoping that I've started to grow on you and that the third time will be a charm. During the course of this application process, I've had many interesting conversations with you commissioners and others as well about the process and what the commission is looking for. And one of the analogies that has come up repeatedly during those conversations is that this commission is like a general manager of a baseball team whose job it is to see what needs are out there and then try to fill those needs with your draft choices. So I got to thinking about that. And if I was the general manager of this process, who would I draft? Would I look for a specialist at a certain position or take some other angle? And as I thought about that, it occurred to me that the person that I would go after if I was the general manager would be the best all-around athlete, regardless of what position that person played. Because if you get the best all-around athlete, that person will enhance the value and quality of the team, regardless of what position the person plays. And the best example I can think of about that might date me a little bit, but it's Alex Rodriguez. Okay? Alex Rodriguez was an all-star shortstop for the Texas Rangers when the New York Yankees traded for him. The Yankees didn't need a shortstop. They already had a no-doubt first-ballot Hall of Famer in the prime of his career named Derek Jeter playing shortstop. But the Yankees didn't get tunnel-visioned on the position, and they went after A-Rod anyway. And made him play third base even though he was a shortstop because he was an outstanding athlete who was capable of playing any position. Now, regardless of what you think of A-Rod or the Yankees, I don't think anyone can seriously challenge the notion that the Yankees benefited greatly from that trade by adding an outstanding athlete to their roster. Now, with that analogy in mind, I want to tell you why I think that I'm the best all-around athlete that would be the best draft pick for you to make to be the best addition to the Court of Appeals from your available draft choices. I have a strong academic background and intellectual capacity, having finished first in my high school class, first in my class at Iowa State, and in the top 3.4% of my law school class at Iowa. I have relevant experience as a lawyer, having spent 14 years in private practice doing primarily civil and criminal trial work, including numerous jury trials. On top of that, I have 3 years of experience in-house with Travelers, where I gained a wealth of experience on complex litigation and insurance matters. I also have relevant experience as a judge, having spent the last 8.5 years as a trial judge doing primarily criminal and juvenile work, which of course makes up a huge portion of the workload of the Court of Appeals. That also includes dozens of jury trials over which I've presided. I also have strong writing and research skills. I have strong work ethic that I would bring to carry my share of the load of the tremendous workload of the Court of Appeals. I would also bring geographic diversity to the group by being a north central Iowa person to add to the roster on the Court of Appeals. I don't think we have anybody from north central Iowa currently on the court. I also bring an extensive foundation of knowledge of the law. As you all know, for the better part of the last 21 years, I have read, analyzed, summarized, and given presentations about all of the published opinions of the Iowa Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals to audiences that include attorneys, trial judges, and appellate judges and justices. And I put together some statistics on that project. In the 2018-2019 term of the Iowa Supreme Court, the Supreme Court issued 108 opinions, which was described as a typical output. If we assume 20 pages per opinion, which is probably a little light, but we'll err on the side of caution, that's about 2,100 pages of opinions that I studied and condensed into an outline of about 40 to 50 pages. Now, if we multiply that by the approximately 20 years that I've been doing this, that's about 42,000 pages of cases that I've read and studied and condensed into outlines totaling about 800 to 1,000 pages. That hobby of mine has resulted in me accumulating a wealth of knowledge that I believe sets me apart from your other draft choices. As I progress to the final point of why I'm your best draft pick, I should flesh out one other detail. I mentioned that as general manager, I'd be looking for the best all-around athlete, but I neglected to mention one nuance, which is that I would also be looking for the best all-around athlete with a good motor. And what I mean by that is Talent without drive and good attitude is wasted. I bring that good motor in the form of my passion, enthusiasm, and energy that I would bring to this position. The best way I can objectively demonstrate that fact is, or that motor, is the fact that I've spent so much of my free time over the past 21 years or so studying the appellate decisions in this state. And as I've mentioned before, I wouldn't do that if I didn't love it. I believe I am at an ideal age for this position in that I'm old enough to have gained the necessary experience to be able to hit the ground running, but I'm still young enough to be able to keep on running for a long time. So I am your draft pick. Please give me a uniform and put me in because I am ready to play. Thank you.
Thank you. The commission does have some questions for you this morning, and so I would like to begin with Mr. Horbach.
I don't have any questions.
Mr. Spies.
Well, I couldn't resist the temptation, being a Yankees fan, to draw upon your analogy here. I hope your energy in summarizing all those cases wasn't accomplished by performance-enhancing drugs.
That's why I cautioned it with whatever you think of A-Rod.
You and I have talked about your growth as a judge and the way that the lawyers and litigants who have appeared before you have perceived you. Could you explain to us how you have grown as a judge over the course of your judicial career and what you found most instrumental in your growth to be the judge you wanted to be?
I think the biggest growth that I've taken or shown or developed is that I think I've become more patient over time. I think I've gained a better understanding and although I knew this coming in and had that foundation to go in, I think I've developed more of an appreciation for what the litigants are going through and what the lawyers are going through, and I've tried to become more patient in doing that than maybe I was when I first started 8.5 years ago. I think I'm much more patient now than I was before. I've tried to grow into more of a mentor for folks. I think some of the letters that have been sent to you folks illustrates that point. I'm very flattered when people say that I've made them a better lawyer. I think that's the biggest compliment I can get as a judge, because those were always the judges I respected most, were the ones that kind of pushed me and made me better. We liken it to, and I know Mr. Horbach and I talked about this, of maybe your teacher that you didn't necessarily like growing up. As you got a few years behind you, all of a sudden you look back and that teacher turned out to be one of your favorite teachers because they pushed you a little bit. And so I always liked judges that did that for me. And I've tried to do that, without, with some patience and understanding. But making lawyers better lawyers is a big compliment to me. Thank you.
Mr. Goodman.
No questions, thank you.
Mrs. Sinclair.
I also am a longtime Yankees fan, and I think A-Rod was a big mistake.
Oh, you're killing me. I worked so hard on that. And here I thought I was worried about the statistics I put together because you're such a human calculator. I thought you were going to call me on my numbers. That's what I was worried about.
My question is, what one skill do you think you bring to the table that makes you the best candidate?
I think that foundation from doing the case law update over all these years, I literally daily in my current job fall back on that. And I didn't start the case law update with that intention. It just kind of happened. That foundation just is such a resource to me. I can't count the number of times where something will come up during a hearing or back in chambers or whatever else that I think I know a case, I can find it quickly, or even if it's not a case directly on point, it's analogous enough that I can get myself into the right area. And it's helped me really kind of understand some nuances of things that I probably wouldn't appreciate if I didn't have that foundation. So I think that the breadth and depth of that project is probably the biggest skill that I bring to the table.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bevel.
Thank you. Judge, can you give us an example of how do other people call on you when there are questions about the law? I mean, even not just district associate judges, but attorneys and district judges?
Yeah, I have, and I think this was mentioned in a couple of letters. I had one lawyer, just as a recent example, who came in. She was in the process of hiring a new a staff person for her office, and she had just had a question because her favorite candidate was married to a police officer in the town, and she does a lot of criminal defense work. And she was just worried about, is that going to cause a conflict? So she felt, I try to create an approachable atmosphere, so I think lawyers are comfortable coming to me. And she says, what do you think about this? And so we talked about it, and she ended up making her own decision on that. But I took that as a big compliment that she felt confident enough to come to me and talk to me about that. We also, because of the nature of district associate court being such a high volume court, and with no staff people around to kind of shepherd people around, a lot of times I am that shepherd. So I'm constantly in the attorney room, herding the cats to get them in for the next hearing or whatever we're trying to do. And because of that kind of collegial atmosphere that develops, it's not unheard of if I happen to walk in as I'm trying to get people rounded up for the next hearing. They've got a question going on about something that's happening in another county, for example, and they'll say, hey, this doesn't affect you, but what do you think about this? And I try not to ever step on any other judge's toes or get into the spot of giving legal advice, but I will sometimes share my thoughts on that, and I think they find that helpful, so I always take that as a big compliment that they view me as a resource in that regard.
Ms. Stanger?
Thank you. All right, I'm going to take my question and try to apply it to your analogy here. My question today has really been focused on kind of the personal experience that may have shaped your journey here today. And so I'm going to use the baseball analogy. Can you tell us a time where you struck out or maybe hit a home run personally that has impacted you or brought you to kind of us here today?
I think my biggest strikeouts that came into play would be the times that I've applied in the past, both for this position but also prior judge positions. I didn't get through my first time, and so it's a real blow to your ego when you think you're qualified for a position, you apply and you don't get it. And I was actually a finalist for a DAJ twice before I finally got it, which is just getting up to getting that close and then have the rug ripped out from under you is very. It has an impact on you. And I to be able to kind of pick yourself back up from that and say, I'm going to do this again because this is really what I want. I'm going to keep driving. I'm going to try to work through the slump, to put it back in the baseball terms. I think that would be one of the biggest things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Pearson?
Thank you. Thank you for being with us today. I noticed on your application that under the pro bono cases that obviously in the past when you were practicing law that you regularly worked on some matters for volunteer lawyer projects. Is there anyone that's really made a significant impact on you that, what should I say, you still maybe think back on or it's inspiration to you today?
There's not one in particular that jumps out at me. I always found that to be really interesting work because it was, one of the things I didn't like about practicing law was the business side of it. I just liked the law. I didn't like to ask for money and bill and how do you generate business and all that kind of fun stuff that's the business side of practicing law. And so the Volunteer Lawyers Project was really rewarding from the standpoint that you didn't have any worries about that. It was strictly done just for the interest in the people and the subject matter. And so that was kind of a refreshing change from the kind of the pressure of practicing law and the business side of it. So whether it was helping with somebody with an eviction or whether it was helping somebody with a collection suit or whether it was a pro bono divorce or getting a restraining order or something like that, was always very rewarding work in general. But there's not one in particular that jumps out at me as being the most memorable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Law?
Judge Ahlers, in your experience, in the application, applicants are asked to note 2 or 3 significant cases to them. Whether it be one of those or a different case, can you talk about a case that affected you personally that was either rewarding or that had an impact on you?
Well, I hate to keep coming back to my worthless cat case, but that one, as I've commented on before, that case is of no legal significance to anybody other than the people involved. but the fact that it still sticks with me, probably close to 8 years after I decided that case, which was about a 20-minute hearing, as a reminder to me of what my job is as a judge to make decisions based on the facts and the law and not any personal likes or dislikes of the parties or what their position is in the community or anything like that. That always is in like a angel on my shoulder type of thing that I think of a lot. So I would point to that one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Gray.
I'll cede my time.
Mr. Bloom.
Okay, I have to go back to the baseball analogy.
I knew I was going to get myself in trouble with that.
So back in the 80s, there was a hitting coach named Charlie Lau who started changing hitting, and it's to this day now all of our 8, 9, 10-year-olds are still learning how to hit that way. So we've had applicants talking about the process of legal research and writing, and that they have a greater expertise in that. And I was wondering, do you consider those skills to be process, or are they God-given natural talent? Is it?
I've never had that question asked before or thought about that. That's a great question. I think it's both. I think you can train yourself to be a good researcher, but I think kind of the inquisitive mind that leads to good research skills and the creativity sometimes you have to get into to be a good researcher, I think that's probably more of an innate gift or talent. So I think it's a combination of both. I think you could, through hard work, turn yourself into a proficient researcher. But I think you're not going to be a top-tier researcher unless you also have that innate ability.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Ms. Conover.
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Sukup.
Thank you. In presiding in a number of different courthouses, what experiences do you think that would help you with in the appellate court?
I think it's helpful because, as I've commented I can't remember if I've done it public or privately, it's really funny because I have 3 adjoining counties, and each one of them really has their own culture and their own environment, which is really weird because you wouldn't think, I don't think the demographics are any different in any of the counties, but there's just a different culture to each one. And so I think that having some recognition of that fact by having that experience would be beneficial in the Court of Appeals because I think it is important to, I think sometimes that experience and how procedures differ sometimes from county to county just because that's the way people do it or that's the way they're used to doing it. And I try to standardize it, but it's a struggle sometimes when you're fighting against the culture of the county to do that. Like for example, there's one county where nobody shows up not in shackles. They just don't show up to court. That's just that's just the way it is. But I think an understanding of that is important because I think sometimes it helps explain why a trial judge did what they did or why a lawyer in a case handled something the way they handled it. So I think that's an important background piece of experience.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. O'Brien.
Thank you. What has been the biggest challenge for you in your work as a judge? How did you address it, and how do you think that would help you on the Court of Appeals?
I think the biggest challenge, and quite frankly, this is my biggest fear on the Court of Appeals. I'll share that with you, just even though you didn't specifically ask. I think the biggest challenge I have is because of time constraints, you can't always generate your best writing project. I am a very I take great pride in my writing, and sometimes you don't have the time to write a masterpiece because you just don't have time because there's the importance of getting the work out is critically important. So I feel like sometimes I want to put a footnote at the end of my last paragraph saying this doesn't represent my best work, because I know it might get appealed, and then they're looking at that, and you're going, I could have written that better, I just didn't have time. So I think that's the biggest challenge I face, and that's my biggest fear on the Court of Appeals is because of the high volume that we're not going to be able to crank out the masterpiece that we'd like to make on each opinion. But the way I deal with that is just simply recognizing the importance that justice delayed is justice denied. So it is important to at the end of the day, it's more important to rule and rule right than it is to put the best package on that ruling. So that's the way I fight through that, is just doing the best I can within the time constraints and accept the fact that it's not always going to be my best product.
Thank you. Well, Judge Ahlers, we are at the bottom of the ninth, and so so I certainly want to express our appreciation for you being here today. We wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank all of you.
I'd like the commission to note that Derek Jeter never hit more than 24 home runs.
How many times did you get on base, though?